The phone rang with an urgency that sliced through the calm of my modest home office. Glancing at the unknown number on the screen, I hesitated but eventually answered. Claire Harmon speaking. Your daughter's wedding is starting. Hurry up and come. A gruff voice blurted out, sending a shiver down my spine. I think you have the wrong number. My daughter Ava is still in college, I replied, my voice steady despite the confusion swirling in my head. No mistake, Claire. It's me, Richard. Richard. The name alone was enough to stir a maelstrom of emotions within me. 15 years had passed since our bitter divorce, since he had callously abandoned Ava and me for his mistress. Now he was calling about a wedding? It had to be some sick joke. Richard, this is nonsense. What are you talking about? Just get here, White Garden Chapel, and hurry, he said, and the line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. Ava, who had been studying in the living room, looked up, her eyes filled with concern. Mom, is everything okay? Just an old ghost, nothing to worry about, I said, forcing a smile. But inside, a storm was brewing. As I sat down, memories I had long buried began to resurface. 15 years ago, life was a picture-perfect portrait. A loving husband, a beautiful daughter, a comfortable home. But then Richard tore that portrait to shreds. I had been a part-time librarian back then, content with my quiet life. Richard, on the other hand, was poised to take over his family's lucrative business. We had never struggled financially, but that wasn't enough for him. The late nights, the weekend meetings, the growing distance, they were all signs I had chosen to ignore. Then came the day he coldly announced his affair and his plans to remarry. I've found someone else. We're having a child, he had said without a hint of remorse. The revelation shattered my world. But worse was yet to come. He left, leaving me with nothing but a broken heart and a mountain of questions. How could he? Why didn't I see it coming? The divorce was swift, his wealthy family ensuring he got off without a hitch. I was left to pick up the pieces, to rebuild a life for Ava and me from scratch. The years that followed were a blur of struggle and determination. I worked day and night, slowly climbing my way up from a part-time librarian to the owner of a thriving online bookstore. Ava grew into a bright, strong-willed college student, my pride and joy. We had come so far, yet Richard's call threatened to unravel everything. I was pulled from my thoughts by Ava's voice. Mom, who was that, really? It was your father, I said, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. Ava's expression hardened. What does he want after all these years? He mentioned a wedding. His, perhaps, but it doesn't matter. We have our own lives now. Ava nodded, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. Richard's abandonment had left a void in her life, one that I had tried desperately to fill. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard's call was more than just a cruel reminder of the past. There was something sinister in his tone, something that told me this wasn't the end of it. As night fell and Ava retreated to her room, I sat alone in the living room, the ghosts of the past haunting me. Richard had moved on, had built a life without us. Why reach out now? What game was he playing? I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let Richard disrupt our lives again. We had come too far to be dragged back into his twisted world. Ava and I, we were survivors, and we would face whatever came our way, together. The phone rang again, jolting me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was Richard. Taking a deep breath, I answered, ready to confront the past. What do you want, Richard? Ah, Claire, finally ready to listen. Richard's voice oozed through the phone with a patronizing tone. I'm not here for games, Richard. What do you want? I replied, my grip tightening around the phone. It's simple. I need you at the White Garden Chapel. It's for our daughter's wedding. Our daughter? Ava is in college, Richard. What are you playing at? There was a pause, and then a chuckle. Not Ava, my other daughter. You know, the one I had with her. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. He had a daughter, almost Ava's age, and he dared to drag me into this farce. You must be out of your mind if you think I'll play along with your twisted fantasies, I spat out. Come on, Claire. I thought you'd enjoy the chance to show how well you've done without me. Plus, it'll be good for Ava to see what she missed out on. His words stung, but I refused to let him see my pain. Ava hasn't missed out on anything, Richard. She's better off without a father like you. The line went silent for a moment before Richard's voice came back, colder this time. You'll regret this, Claire. I always get what I want, one way or another. The call ended abruptly, leaving me in a state of shock and anger. How dare he? After all these years, he still had the audacity to try and manipulate me. I couldn't let this go. Not this time. It was clear that Richard hadn't changed, and now he was dragging another innocent child into his web of lies. I had to protect Ava and myself from his vindictive games. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called an old friend who had become a private investigator. Tom, I need a favor. Can you find out everything about Richard's other daughter? I need to know what he's planning. Tom agreed without hesitation, understanding the urgency in my voice. Meanwhile, Ava, sensing something was amiss, confronted me. Mom, what's going on? Why are you so worried all of a sudden? I hesitated, not wanting to involve her in Richard's mess, but she deserved the truth. Ava, your father called yesterday. He claims he's getting his other daughter married and wanted me there. Ava's face contorted with a mix of anger and disbelief. He's unbelievable. What are you going to do? I'm going to find out what he's up to. But I need you to promise me something, Ava. Stay out of this. I don't want you getting hurt. Ava nodded reluctantly, her eyes filled with a fire that reminded me so much of myself at her age. Over the next few days, Tom's investigation unearthed disturbing details. Richard's new family was a facade. His business was failing, and his marriage was on the rocks. The wedding was a desperate attempt to maintain appearances, and he wanted me there to further his own agenda. Armed with this information, I knew I had to act. It was time to confront Richard and end his manipulations once and for all. I decided to go to the White Garden Chapel, not to participate in his charade, but to expose it. As I drove to the chapel, my mind raced with possibilities. What would I say? How would he react? But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. I was doing this for Ava, for myself, and for the innocent daughter Richard had dragged into his deceitful world. I arrived at the chapel, steeling myself for the confrontation. It was time to face Richard and the past he represented. Today, I would finally break free from his shadow and protect my family from his destructive influence. As I stepped into the White Garden Chapel, the lavish decor couldn't mask the underlying tension in the air. Richard stood at the front, his face a mix of surprise and annoyance upon seeing me. "Claire, you actually came. How unexpected," he sneered. "I'm not here for your games, Richard. I know about your failing business and sham of a marriage. What are you really up to?" His smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of anger. "Always so clever, aren't you? Well, since you're here, why not play along? For old time's sake. I'm not one of your pawns, Richard, and neither is our daughter. What about this other daughter of yours? Does she know about your lies?" Richard's facade of control was slipping. "You always were too nosy for your own good. Yes, my business is struggling, but this wedding will secure a deal that'll save it. All you need to do is stand there and look pretty." "Look pretty? For your business deal?" I couldn't hide my disgust. "You're using your own daughter's wedding as a business transaction? That's low, even for you." He stepped closer, his voice a menacing whisper. "You have no idea what it takes to maintain a lifestyle like mine. You were always too simple to understand." "Simple? I've built a life for Ava and me without stooping to deceit and manipulation. You're pathetic, Richard." His eyes narrowed. "Watch your mouth, Claire. You're in my world now." Just then, a young woman, presumably Richard's other daughter, approached us. Her expression was a mix of confusion and hurt. "Dad, what's going on? Who is she?" "This is Claire, an old friend. Don't mind her, she was just leaving," Richard said, attempting to regain his composure. "No, she's not just leaving," the young woman protested. "She looks upset. What did you do, Dad?" Richard's mask was finally crumbling. "Nothing, it's just business." I looked at the young woman, seeing a reflection of Ava in her. "I'm sorry you're caught up in this. Your father's not the man you think he is." "Enough, Claire," Richard barked. "Leave now, or I'll make you regret it." "I'm not afraid of you, Richard, but I won't stoop to your level. I'm leaving, but not because you told me to. I'm leaving because there's nothing here for me." As I turned to leave, Richard's voice followed me, laced with malice. "You'll pay for this, Claire, you and your daughter." Outside, the cool air did little to calm my raging thoughts. Richard's threat lingered in my mind. I knew then that this wasn't over. I had to protect Ava and expose Richard for who he truly was. Driving home, my resolve hardened. Richard had thrown down the gauntlet, and I was ready to pick it up. It was time for his reign of manipulation and deceit to end. For Ava's sake, for my sake, and for the sake of the young woman who deserved a father far better than Richard. Back at home, I relayed the day's events to Ava. Her reaction was a mix of anger and determination. "We can't let him get away with this, Mom. He's not just a liar, he's dangerous." "I know, Ava, and I have a plan. But it's risky, and I need you to trust me." Ava nodded, her eyes reflecting the fire of resolve. "Whatever it takes, Mom." Over the next few days, I pored over Richard's business dealings, thanks to some discreet inquiries by Tom. The picture that emerged was one of desperation and deceit. Richard's company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and his personal life was no better. His second marriage was crumbling, just like his first. Armed with this information, I reached out to Richard's business partners, carefully planting seeds of doubt about his stability and trustworthiness. It was a subtle campaign, but effective. Soon, whispers of Richard's impending downfall began to circulate in his social circles. Meanwhile, Ava took to social media, skillfully crafting posts that highlighted Richard's unethical practices, being careful not to mention him directly. It wasn't long before the posts went viral, adding to the growing storm around Richard. The final blow came when I anonymously tipped off a local journalist about Richard's shady dealings. The subsequent article was a damning exposé that sent ripples through the community. As Richard's world began to crumble, he became increasingly erratic. He called me one evening. His voice barely contained fury. "What have you done, Claire? You're ruining me." "I haven't done anything, Richard. You're the architect of your own downfall. You think you're so clever, but you're nothing. I'll destroy you and your precious daughter." "Threats, Richard, really? That's all you have left?" I said, my voice steady despite the chill his words sent down my spine. "You haven't seen the last of me, Claire. I'll make sure you regret this." But his threats were empty, his power waning. The community turned against him, his business partners withdrew their support, and his social standing evaporated. Richard had become a pariah, undone by his own actions. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Richard's company declared bankruptcy, and his wife filed for divorce. He tried to reach out to Ava, perhaps seeking some form of redemption, but she refused to engage with him. "You did it, Mom. You brought him down," Ava said one evening as we sat in our living room, the weight of the past months finally lifting. "We did it, Ava, together." But even as we celebrated our victory, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Richard had been a part of my life, once a source of love and happiness. It was a tragic end to a chapter that had started with so much promise. In the quiet aftermath of Richard's downfall, Ava and I found ourselves in a reflective mood. Our living room, once a sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world, now felt too silent, too still. "Mom, do you think we went too far?" Ava asked one evening, her eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't sure I had. I sighed, the weight of her question heavy on my shoulders. "Richard brought this on himself, Ava. We just accelerated the inevitable." "I know, but I can't help feeling guilty. We've essentially ruined a man's life." "He ruined his own life, Ava. We just exposed the truth." I paused, my thoughts drifting. "But I understand what you're feeling. There's no joy in seeing someone's life crumble, even if they deserve it." Ava nodded, her expression somber. "What now, Mom? What do we do with all this emptiness?" "We rebuild, Ava. We fill our lives with new memories, new joys. We've been given a chance to start afresh, free from Richard's shadow." The conversation lingered in the air as we both retreated into our own thoughts. The weeks that followed were a time of healing and reflection. We focused on our business, which had thrived amidst the chaos, and on strengthening our bond, which had been tested but not broken. But just when we thought we could close the chapter on Richard, fate had one more twist in store. A knock on our door one rainy evening revealed a young woman, drenched and shivering. Richard's other daughter, the one he had used as a pawn in his twisted games. "Miss Harmon? I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Elise, Richard's daughter. I didn't know where else to go." Her appearance was a shock, but I couldn't turn her away. "Come in, Elise. You're welcome here." As Elise settled in, wrapped in a warm blanket with a cup of tea in her hands, she shared her story. Richard had abandoned her and her mother, leaving them with nothing but debts and broken promises. "I'm sorry, Elise," Ava said, her voice filled with empathy. "We didn't know about you when we set out to expose your father." Elise shook her head, a tear trailing down her cheek. "No, you did what needed to be done. I'm just lost. I don't know what to do now." "We'll help you, Elise," I said, a resolve settling in my heart. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure this out together." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. We helped Elise settle her father's debts and supported her in starting a new life. It was a time of healing, not just for Elise, but for Ava and me as well. We had extended our family, found a new purpose in our shared experiences. As I watched Ava and Elise laughing together one afternoon, a sense of peace filled me. We had come full circle, from victims of Richard's deceit to architects of our own destiny. Our lives were once again our own, richer and fuller for the trials we had endured. With Elise now part of our lives, our home buzzed with a new energy. It was refreshing, yet it came with its own set of challenges. Elise, carrying the scars of her father's neglect, often found herself grappling with complex emotions. One evening, as we gathered in the living room, Elise's facade of strength crumbled. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice quivering. "How do you move past the anger, the betrayal?" Ava reached out, taking Elise's hand in hers. "It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. For years I hated my father for abandoning us, but eventually I realized that hate was only holding me back. I want to move on, but I feel so lost," Elise confessed, tears brimming in her eyes. "You're not alone, Elise," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You're part of this family now. We'll navigate this journey together." Our conversation that night was a turning point. It brought us closer, creating a bond forged from shared pain and mutual understanding. In the weeks that followed, we supported each other in ways big and small. Ava and Elise grew particularly close, finding solace in their shared experiences as daughters of the same flawed man. But just when we thought we had left the worst behind, Richard reappeared, a shadow from the past we thought we had escaped. He showed up at our doorstep one day, unannounced and unwanted. "Richard, what are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice cold. I need help," he stammered, a shadow of his former self. "I've lost everything. I have nowhere else to go." His appearance was pitiful, but I felt no sympathy. "You made your bed, Richard. Now you have to lie in it." "Please, Claire. I've changed. I realize now what I've done to you, to Ava, to Elise. I want to make amends." Elise stepped forward, her expression one of disbelief. "Make amends? After everything you've done? You abandoned us." Richard's eyes darted between us, desperation etched on his face. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm your father. Doesn't that count for something?" "No, Richard. Being a father is more than just a title. It's about being there, about love and support. You've done none of that," I said firmly. Ava stood beside me, her stance resolute. "You need to leave, Richard. There's nothing for you here." Defeated, Richard turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the fading light of the day. Watching him go, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that he was finally out of our lives, and sadness for the man he could have been, the father he should have been. That night, we sat together, a family united not by blood, but by our shared experiences and newfound love for each other. We talked about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. It was a future we would face together, stronger and more resilient than ever. In the weeks following Richard's departure, a sense of calm settled over our household. Ava, Elise, and I found comfort in our routine, each day bringing us closer and healing old wounds. We were a family, not by blood, but by choice, bound by our resilience and shared experiences. One evening, as we gathered for dinner, Elise broached a subject we had all been avoiding. "I've been thinking about my dad," she said hesitantly. "I know he's done terrible things, but he's still my father. I feel like I should do something, try to help him somehow." Ava reached across the table, squeezing Elise's hand. "I understand how you feel, Elise, but remember, we can't fix him. He has to want to change, and right now, he doesn't." "I know," Elise sighed. "It's just hard to let go." "It is," I agreed, "but sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward. We've all been hurt by Richard, but we can't let him define our lives." The conversation lingered in the air, a reminder of the complex emotions we all harbored. Yet it was also a testament to our strength and our ability to face difficult truths. In the days that followed, we focused on building our future. Ava excelled in her studies, her dreams of becoming a writer now within reach. Elise, with our support, enrolled in community college, determined to carve her own path. As for me, the bookstore continued to thrive, a symbol of my journey from a broken-hearted wife to a successful businesswoman and mother. But more than that, it was a place where Ava, Elise, and I could share our love for stories and dreams. One sunny afternoon, as we rearranged the bookstore, Ava looked up from a stack of books, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mom, Elise, I've been thinking. We've all been through so much, and we've come out stronger. What if we share our story? Write a book about it?" Elise's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea, Ava. Our story could inspire others who are going through tough times." I nodded, feeling a surge of pride. "I think it's a wonderful idea. Let's do it. Let's tell our story, our way." And so we began. Nights were spent around the kitchen table, sharing memories, laughter, and tears as we penned our story. It was a cathartic experience, one that brought us even closer. Months later, as I held the first copy of our book, I felt a sense of accomplishment and closure. We had turned our pain into something beautiful, something that could potentially help others. As we prepared for the book launch, I looked at Ava and Elise, my heart full of love and gratitude. We had weathered the storm, and now we were ready to embrace the sunshine. "Our story doesn't end here," I said, smiling at them. "This is just the beginning, a new chapter in our lives." Ava and Elise smiled back, their eyes shining with hope and excitement for the future. Together, we stepped out into the world, ready to share our story and start a new journey, a journey filled with promise, love, and the unbreakable bond of a family forged in fire and tempered by time.
My name is Emily, and I'm 35 years old. I've been a homemaker for 10 years, married to my husband, a doctor named Michael. We haven't been blessed with children, but we've been living a reasonably happy life. However, something happened that put an end to our 10 years of marriage. It happened one day. "Emily, this is the end for us," said Michael, who came home late as usual. "What do you mean by the end? What are you suddenly talking about?" "I've decided to marry my mistress, so we're getting divorced today." "Marry your mistress? What are you talking about? I've made up my mind. I'm leaving you and marrying her. Besides, we didn't marry for love, so you probably don't care, right?" Indeed, ours wasn't a love marriage. Michael's parents were eager for him to marry and found me as a suitable partner. We hardly knew each other and got married quickly. The only thing we had in common was that we originally had the same last name. People might say it's fate that we have the same last name, I thought, attracted by the idea in the rush of surrounding marriages, and decided to marry him. Since then, we managed our wedding and married life well enough, but I never imagined we would divorce after 10 years. It wasn't a love marriage, but we've lived together for 10 years, and now you suddenly want to marry your mistress. When did you start betraying me? It's not betrayal. I met her about a year ago. She's a nurse who joined our hospital. She's charming, unlike you, always caring for me, and it's natural that I was drawn to her." "Natural? Are you serious?" "Yes, I've always been serious. These 10 years living with you have been true hell. I was honestly sick and tired of supporting such a boring woman, but that ends today." "How can you talk like that?" "It's the truth. You're a homemaker who produces nothing while she's an active nurse. Ask any man in the country, they'd all choose her over you. Do you think a high-flying doctor like me needs someone like you?" After a pause, I was the first to speak. "Fine, let's divorce." I never thought I'd be married to someone who could say such things so calmly. "We can discuss alimony and property division later with a lawyer. I'll sign the divorce papers and send them later. Until then, I'll go back to my parents' house." But then Michael interrupted. "No need for discussions. We don't even need a divorce paper." "What do you mean?" "We can't separate without it. If we don't divorce, you can't remarry. You're so naive, it's pathetic. The truth is, I never submitted our marriage registration. We're not a married couple, just cohabitants. So there's no divorce, no alimony, no property division. That day, Michael was supposed to submit our marriage registration, but I couldn't go because of an urgent matter. But it turns out he never submitted it. Not submitted? Wait, are you joking? We've been living as a married couple for 10 years. It's impossible that you didn't submit it. Normally, yes. That's why I made that rule at the beginning. If you went to the office, everything would be ruined. When we got married, we made some rules. I, as a homemaker, would handle all the household chores. I was on an allowance, and part-time work was prohibited. And Michael would handle all governmental and official matters. Why would you do such a thing? Because I was about to be forced into a marriage with someone I didn't love. It's not like I was going to submit it easily. I was saving marriage for someone I was destined to be with. Then you should have refused the marriage proposal in the first place. I couldn't refuse. My parents are stubborn and wouldn't listen. What would have happened if I said I didn't want to marry? Plus, I wanted a housekeeper. I'm a busy doctor and can't often tend to household chores, so I decided to marry you as a housekeeper. It was a good deal for you too, right? You could eat well and have a roof over your head without working. You seemed desperate to get married too. What, you were probably feeling pressured because your friends were getting married, right? Even though we weren't actually married, you were seen as the woman who married a doctor. This 10-year relationship was a win-win for both of us. That's all it was, and it ends today. You should be grateful for the good times you had. Now you have to live on your own without relying on others. I can't believe this. Oh, and one more thing, don't tell my parents about this. If you do something unnecessary, you know what will happen to your father, right? My father, who runs a medical equipment sales company, has a contract with the hospital where he works. It was through my marriage to him that this connection was made. If I told my in-laws, he's implying that he'd sever the contract as a threat. In other words, he's threatening me not to do anything unnecessary. It's your fault for being deceived. How pitiful to be thrown out with nothing, he said, laughing. But the one who would be thrown out without knowing anything was actually him. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. What's so funny all of a sudden? I can't believe you became a doctor with that kind of knowledge. What do you mean? I knew all along about your mistress and that you didn't submit our marriage registration. That's impossible. That's why I've been preparing, waiting for the day you'd bring it up yourself, preparing to get my revenge on you. In fact, I had suspected his infidelity for the past 6 months, but I didn't have enough evidence to confront him, so I hired a private investigator to look into his affair. Ma'am, there are 2 things I need to tell you. The first is that your husband is indeed having an affair. We've got evidence of him entering a hotel with a nurse from his workplace. And the second is from their conversations. There's a possibility that you two are not legally married. Possibility of not being legally married. What does that mean? I overheard your husband and his mistress at a cafe. He said they didn't need to worry about alimony or property division since they never submitted a marriage registration. What? I can't believe it. We've been living as a married couple for 10 years. I don't know why he didn't submit the marriage registration. That's why he never let me handle any official procedures. Yeah, that seems to be the case. I can't believe this. How could this happen? It's rare to hear about not submitting a marriage registration for 10 years, but it's not unheard of. This is too much. Am I just supposed to accept this? If we were never married from the start, there's nothing I can do. Not necessarily. What do you mean? Let's make him pay for deceiving you for 10 years. First, we need to prepare without him noticing. And so I began to prepare with the investigator to punish my husband. So what if you knew we were never married from the start? So it doesn't matter what I do with other women. I don't need to take any responsibility, he said. I was pitiful for not knowing anything, but it seems you are the one who was pitiful. What do you mean? We're considered to be in a common law relationship on paper. So what, you might not know, but you can actually claim alimony and divide property in a common law relationship. What? He didn't know that registering as a de facto marriage would backfire on him. You can make claims in a common law relationship. It's not well known, but yes, you can. Of course, there are some conditions, but looking at your case, it seems you meet them. What are these conditions? The common law relationship is established based on these two criteria. First, both parties must have the intention to marry. If it's just living together, that's cohabitation. Mutual intent to marry is key. That seems subjective and hard to judge. For instance, if you had a wedding ceremony or recognized as a couple by others, it can be acknowledged. We've had a wedding ceremony, and our parents and friends know us as a couple. Then the first criterion is met. The second is living as if married. This includes sharing household life for over 3 years. You've been living together as a couple for over 10 years. As a homemaker, you've obviously shared the household finances. This is recognized as a marital relationship. So that means if you can provide proof of what we discussed, you can claim alimony and divide property. I'm not an expert in this area, so I'll introduce you to a lawyer. You can work with them to bring him down. After consulting the lawyer I was referred to, I was told that I could indeed claim alimony and property division from my husband. So I'm going to demand alimony and property division from you. I informed my husband, who turned pale. His confidence, which had looked down on me just a moment ago, was gone. But even if you can claim alimony and property division, you're just an unemployed woman. Do you plan to rely on your parents after being kicked out? Didn't I say I was preparing? I've already found a job starting next month. I've also got my eye on a new place. Don't worry about me. What? He thought I, a clueless homemaker, would be helpless, but the tables had turned. Ail us, so I'll make sure to discuss this with your parents. Just so you know, do you not care what happens to your father? If they want to break the contract, let them. What, sure, you were the link to the hospital, but the contract continued because of my father and his company's efforts. Whether or not they keep the contract is up to them. Let's see if they'll break a contract just because the doctor's wife of 10 years was a lie. Try saying that, you. My father and I won't be affected if the contract is broken over this. It only shows the depth of their trust. We'll just find another hospital to partner with. Saying this, I took out my phone. You're not calling your parents, are you? That's exactly what I'm doing. Our parents think we're still married. It's only natural to inform them if this relationship is ending. Then, to my surprise, my husband began to apologize to me. Please let me talk to them. Don't call. Why? You know how strict my parents are. If they find out about this, I'm done. What does that have to do with me, huh? You're asking me not to tell the truth because your parents are strict. Are you kidding? You could have refused the marriage from the start if you didn't intend to marry. After 10 years of a selfish marriage, you're afraid of your parents finding out. I can't accept such a convenient story. But I can't accept your story. I'll make sure to tell both your parents and mine. And so I called both sets of parents. All 4 were shocked upon hearing my story. A meeting was promptly arranged at our house. I've heard everything over the phone. Is it true that you pretended to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration? Speak up, you foolish son. It's true. I didn't submit it. Why would you do such a thing? Didn't you think about how Emily would feel? I had no choice. No choice, you say? How can you even say that? It's actually your fault, Dad and Mom. I didn't want to get married, yet you started looking for a bride on your own, saying it was time I got married. You arranged meetings and tried to force a marriage on me. You're the one who agreed to the marriage, aren't you? I had to agree. If I had refused, you would have made a fuss about it. So I decided to get married. If you were resolved to marry, why didn't you submit the marriage registration? I read about a man on the internet who was in the same situation. He didn't want to marry but had to because of his parents. He lived a married life without submitting the registration, then revealed the truth when he found someone he truly loved. That's appalling. And what happened to that guy in the end? He's now married to the person he loves and has a real marriage. So I too will marry my girlfriend and have a real marriage. Then my parents, who had been silent until now, spoke up. A real marriage, huh? Sure, you might not have had a love marriage, but do you remember what you said at the wedding? We will never forget to care for each other and build a home full of smiles. What did those words mean to you? What were we shown then? We sent our daughter to you hoping for her happiness, but you deceived her for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. Did you build a home full of smiles? Now you're leaving her for another woman. Can someone who acts without a shred of care, even if they change partners, truly have a real marriage? Well, I was happy you married our daughter, not just because you were a doctor. I thought she could build a happy home with someone as sincere as you, but it seems we were mistaken and deceived. And you threatened our daughter. If she told us about this, you'd cut off the contract with our company. What? Seriously? If you're going to threaten our daughter, we'll cut off the contract ourselves. Be warned, we will tell the truth when asked why. If you do that, there'll be rumors at the hospital. Well, yes, but that's the result of your own actions. You were the one who threatened us with cutting off the contract. My husband was in complete panic at this unexpected turn of events. Please wait. This is getting out of hand. Let's just talk. At that moment, my father-in-law grabbed my husband by the collar. Furious, we didn't raise you to be such a scoundrel. What were you thinking? Father, please stop. By not submitting the marriage registration, you might have thought you were doing yourself a favor. But because of your selfish actions, Emily was strung along for 10 years. What were you thinking causing such trouble to others? The living room fell silent. My husband, faced with my father-in-law's words, had nothing more to say. Emily and your parents, I'm truly sorry for the trouble caused by this idiot. No, your parents shouldn't apologize. It's not your fault. However, it's partly our responsibility as parents for letting him act this way. For now, we'll take him home and make sure he doesn't continue his reckless behavior. We'll deal with the aftermath properly. We're very sorry for all this. And with that, my husband was taken away by his parents back to his childhood home. You've been through a lot. For now, you should come back home and rest. We'll think about what to do next later. You don't need to worry about anything right now. My parents thought I was completely exhausted and deceived. They spoke to me with such kindness. Thank you, but I won't go back home yet. I still have things I need to do. I declined their offer and stayed in my own home. What I had to do was prepare for the final settlement with my now ex-husband. Gathering evidence for our common-law relationship, I was getting ready to claim alimony and divide our assets. A few weeks later, a meeting with a lawyer was arranged. However, even if I agreed to alimony, why should I divide my property? She's been a homemaker for 10 years, never working a day. All the furniture, clothes, food, I paid for everything. Now you're telling me to hand over the money I worked hard for, the furniture I bought. He rented, unable to accept that his money would be shared with me. Yes, that's correct. The money you earned and the furniture are subject to property division. Why does it have to be like that? Who did the housework while you were working? Who cooked meals with the groceries you bought? That's irrelevant now. No, it's very relevant. A homemaker is entitled to property division because housework and childcare have economic value. Speaking as a human, not just a lawyer, do you think housework is something anyone can do? That it's just expected of a homemaker. The reason you could live freely is because of her support. Don't get that wrong. And this situation is a result of your actions, yet you have the audacity to be selfish. What did you say? Never mind anyway. She's entitled to half of the assets for property division. That's how it is. Damn, regarding alimony, we intend to claim $100,000 from you. $100,000? Why so much for a relationship that wasn't even a marriage? It's precisely because you weren't married. Normally, alimony claims in common law relationships range from $10,000 to $40,000. However, in your case, you pretended to be married for 10 years and selfishly tried to kick her out when you found someone else. The amount is determined by the severity and duration of your actions. But still, you may think 10 years is just a short time, but it's longer than you realize. During that time, she devoted herself to you, believing you were a married couple. You have no right to complain after betraying her. A perfect rebuttal. He couldn't say anything and reluctantly agreed to my demands. Then I also sent a notice of claim for alimony to his mistress. I knew who and where she was thanks to the investigator. As he had said, she was a nurse working at the same hospital. The mistress, having heard from him that there was no possibility of alimony or property division, must have been utterly shocked by the contents of the claim. Wait a minute. This isn't what you told me. What do you want? I told you not to talk to me at the hospital. I got this from your wife. You said there wouldn't be any alimony because we weren't married. What's this all about? I later learned that in a panic after being served with the alimony claim from me, she confronted him at the hospital with the notice I had sent. Okay, let's talk about this later. Not here. There are too many people around. We'll both be in trouble if this turns into a rumor. I don't care about that. I can't pay this kind of alimony. You said it was okay, so you should pay. Pay it for me. What? I won't pay a penny. You were the one who wanted this relationship. You said I was the only one for you, that you wanted to marry me. Hey, quiet down. Everyone can hear us. Just so you know, I'm not in the wrong here. If you want to make amends with your wife, do it yourself. Tell her I don't owe her a penny, that you'll take care of everything. This exchange led to the revelation of their affair to the entire hospital. It quickly became the talk of the place. And then the final blow was my father's request to the hospital. I apologize, but we would like to terminate our contract at the end of next month. Then the hospital, aware of the rumors, asked my father, "Excuse me for asking, but is the reason for canceling the contract related to Dr. Michael's affair?" It's already become a rumor. Yes, a nurse presumed to be involved caused quite a scene. I never imagined he had been pretending to be married for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration. I never expected it to turn out like this. You mean he never submitted the registration? Weren't you aware that he hadn't submitted the marriage registration? All we knew was that he, being married, had an affair. What do you mean he didn't submit the marriage registration? With my father's request, it was revealed that he had been deceiving me for 10 years by not submitting the marriage registration. This news spread among the other nurses. Dr. Michael deceived his wife for 10 years without submitting a marriage registration, and he had an affair with a nurse. How low? How could he do that? Can someone really not notice for 10 years? Apparently, Emily's maiden name was the same, and he managed all the official paperwork. That's scary. The rumor spread not only among hospital staff, but also to patients. And both Michael and his mistress received cold stares. Unable to endure, they soon resigned from the hospital. As my father told me, "Did you manage to get the alimony?" Yes, I received payments from both him and his mistress. She refused to pay until the end, claiming she was deceived. But the lawyer made it clear her argument wouldn't hold, and she reluctantly agreed to pay. That's good. What about you, Dad? Did the contract get canceled after all? No, that's off the table. He resigned, and since our company is trusted, the hospital asked us not to cancel the contract. We couldn't cancel it after they asked like that. That's a relief. Then I started a new life in a new place and was living happily. About a year and a half later, my ex-husband contacted me. Is it true you got remarried? I had married a man I met at work, and somehow he had found out. I wondered whose number this was, going through the trouble of changing your number just to contact me. Just answer my question. Yes, I got married. You betrayed me. Betray? We were never legally married, so I didn't think it would matter to you. Right. That's a different matter, indeed. Things are different now. We're completely separated, so my marriage has nothing to do with you. Is that why you contacted me? After I said this, he seemed at a loss for words. Then he taunted, "Of course, you're still unmarried, since you probably haven't submitted a marriage registration. You're that kind of woman." But things weren't as he imagined. Unfortunately for you, my husband isn't the kind of person to do such terrible things. He knows all about your story. So to ensure I wouldn't feel anxious, we went to the office together to submit the registration. Sadly for you, things aren't as you thought. I can somewhat understand your wish for me to be unhappy, considering your own misery. But sorry, we're happily married. I told him this and hung up the phone. What kind of life he leads now, I don't know. But unless he changes his selfish nature, it's unlikely he'll ever find happiness. I don't think marriage should be about money, but some people really care about wealth more than anything else. My sister-in-law Laura is one of those people. I never thought greed would become such a big issue over an inheritance after my brother, a well-respected surgeon, died. I'm Julia Roberts. I manage a jewelry store, and I'm happy being single at 35. However, I've been thinking about marriage since my boyfriend recently proposed. Our families are getting together tomorrow to celebrate our engagement, but I can feel tension brewing. My older brother Kyle, who is a well-known surgeon in Paris, has always looked out for me and taught me a lot because he's much older. He jokes about checking out my boyfriend as if he were my dad, which makes me laugh, but I can tell he's a bit worried. Kyle's marriage to Laura, a very beautiful woman with questionable morals, really shows the conflict between looks and true character. Despite their glamorous life, Laura's love for luxury puts a strain on our family relationships. Her need for expensive things often comes before her promises, leaving us let down and upset. At first, we overlooked Laura's behavior, thinking it was because of the pressure to look good. But as she started skipping more family events, our patience started to wear thin. Her decision to cancel on tomorrow's gathering at the last minute for tea at a fancy hotel is a perfect example of her selfishness. While we wouldn't mind her not being there, it's her lack of thought for others that really bothers me. I'm tired of always bending over backward to accommodate her every whim. I tried to talk to my brother about it, but his weakness for Laura stops any serious conversation. He just apologized for the inconvenience and tried to reassure me. He promised he would talk to her about her actions. "I'll be there tomorrow," he assured me, convincing me to drop the issue for now. What bothers me the most isn't just Laura's selfishness, but also how she gets my busy brother to say sorry for her and do her tasks, even though she doesn't work and could handle them herself. Despite being at home full-time, Laura doesn't do housework. She hires cleaners and prefers to eat out. Her days are filled with shopping for brand name items, leaving little time for real responsibilities. The next day, our family meeting went well, and my boyfriend won everyone over. It was a nice gathering, although it didn't last long. That evening, just as I was relaxing, Laura called out of the blue and started yelling. She demanded scones and macarons and scolded me for neglecting her. Confused, I tried to talk to her calmly, but she kept shouting. Despite my efforts to explain, Laura kept demanding, paying no attention to reason. She even demanded a souvenir from the hotel and had so many other unreasonable expectations that left me both puzzled and tired. What should have been a happy evening ended with me feeling exhausted and annoyed because of Laura's unreasonable demands and outbursts. I wondered how Kyle managed to find peace in his daily life with Laura's constant mood swings. What made him marry her in the first place? While her beauty was obvious, her self-centered nature was off-putting. I thought maybe she was spoiled because of her looks. I was worried for Kyle, but I knew I shouldn't interfere with his marriage. It was his choice after all, and he had always respected my choices too. The next day, at the jewelry store where I work, I saw Laura outside walking arm in arm with a man around her age, probably in his late 30s. They were chatting comfortably as they came into the store. I paused before going over to them. Laura acted like nothing was wrong when she saw me, which made me even more uncomfortable. When I asked about the man with her, Laura said he was just an old friend from her modeling days. Still, seeing them together, especially since she's married, made me feel uneasy. As Laura looked at the jewelry, she boldly asked if she could get an employee discount, seemingly unaware that this was inappropriate. I calmly told her we don't offer such discounts. Honestly, I didn't like the idea of her friend buying things for her, and she seemed slightly annoyed when I told her the discount wasn't available. Laura picked out some items and left, leaving the man to pay the bill. This made me wonder about their relationship. That evening, I decided to talk to Kyle about what I saw, but when I called him, he seemed really down. "Kyle, what's wrong?" I asked, noticing he was upset. I had my suspicions about Laura, but I didn't mention them. When I tried to talk about my upcoming wedding, Kyle seemed distracted by his own thoughts. He talked about saving for our wedding next year and invited me over, but didn't say much about Laura. His uncertainty made me curious. Although I tried to discuss the wedding details, Kyle was non-committal and ended the call abruptly, asking me to meet at our parents' house without explaining why. Maybe he wasn't feeling well. Kyle, a dedicated surgeon, often puts other people's needs before his own health, and this tendency of his to ignore his own health worries me. Despite his jokes about the risks of his job, I couldn't stop thinking that his non-stop work schedule was wearing him down. I doubted that Laura, with her self-centered attitude, could give him the support he needed. Kyle sent an email later outlining the plan for a gathering at our parents' house. When I got there, I was shocked to see how pale and worn he looked, worse than ever before. I asked him how he was, but he just gave me vague answers about being busy with work. Finally, I gathered the courage to talk about Laura's recent actions. I told him about her visit to my store with a young man and wondered aloud if she was deceiving him again. Laura's past actions had always worried me, and I couldn't overlook them any longer. I've been too busy with work to pay much attention to her, my brother confessed. Our parents were upset by her absence at the gathering, which gave me a chance to bring up my concerns. When I asked Kyle about Laura's absence, he said solemnly, "Laura isn't here today, which is why I asked you all to come." "I have a favor to ask." With a serious look, Kyle shared some shocking news. Despite our shock, he stood firm, leaving us stunned. 5 months later, tragedy struck as my brother died from stomach cancer, a result of constant stress and overwork. It was a harsh truth to face. Despite his commitment to saving others, he had neglected his own health. He had started to see signs and went through tough tests that confirmed his illness. We wished he had told us sooner. Tears flowed at his funeral, surrounded by a deep feeling of loss. I remembered all the ways Kyle had supported me during my early challenges. His death, before he even turned 30, left us overwhelmed with grief. Yet during our mourning, Laura's actions were glaringly obvious. She wore a flashy necklace to the funeral, a gift from another man, showing no respect for the solemn occasion. Her insensitive behavior was unbearable. Overcome with anger, I confronted her. "Why are you wearing that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Don't you realize how much my brother cared for you?" Laura just smiled, seemingly untouched by the seriousness of the situation. "I know," she replied carelessly. "It's just how the world works. If you're so unhappy, why did you marry me?" Her harsh words really hurt, and I had to hold back my anger in front of my brother, our parents, and the others. It was clear that Laura didn't care about my brother's memory, as all of her selfish behavior and her careless talk about their marriage and waiting for her inheritance made me furious. Before I knew it, I almost slapped her, but a man by her side caught my hand. He then introduced himself as a nurse who had worked with Kyle and was here to look after me at Kyle's request. I was confused, trying to understand everything going on. Despite the sadness of the funeral, hearing the laughter of the nurses and doctors who were Kyle's colleagues brought me a moment of comfort amidst the chaos. I turned to the nurse who had stopped me during the laughter for some clarity. His reply was straightforward. "Did the doctor leave any inheritance behind? Your family should know." His words hit home. I knew very well that my brother hadn't left any inheritance, but Laura, not knowing this, became hysterical. She started accusing us of plotting against her to take the money for ourselves. She was sure she would soon get a large sum of money. As Laura's accusations grew louder, the nurse's amusement turned into full laughter. Seeing things getting out of hand, my dad stepped in, calm but assertive. "Do you really not know?" he asked her. Eager for answers, Laura demanded to know what was going on. I obliged, sharing the details of my brother's financial arrangements. During his lifetime, he had set aside 20 million euros specifically for my wedding, and had other generous gifts planned as well. As this reality dawned on Laura, her expression changed dramatically from shock to pale disbelief. My brother, although highly respected for his medical expertise, was known for his lavish spending habits. He indulged in extravagant parties, exclusive dinners, and luxurious accommodations as a way to relieve the stress from his demanding career and family responsibility. Despite his intent to share these joys with Laura, she was notably absent during both his challenging and celebratory moments. It was not Laura who stood by him during tough times. Instead, it was his colleagues and friends, the very people who were now gathered to pay their respects, who supported him. The nurses, whose laughter had earlier filled the room, began to share poignant memories of my brother's acts of kindness and generosity. They recounted how, despite his hectic schedule, he always made time to look after them, hosting gatherings that left a lasting impression. Their stories deepened their admiration for him, inspiring them to strive harder in their own careers. As they spoke, they revealed another significant act of kindness from my brother: the donation of the remainder of his estate to the hospital. Representatives from the hospital were present and expressed their gratitude for his contribution, which would help alleviate their annual struggles with research funding and improve future medical care. Witnessing the extent of my brother's compassion towards others, I couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment towards Laura. While he had impacted so many lives in such positive ways, Laura, who should have been his closest companion, displayed nothing but selfishness and greed. Months later, Laura contacted me, her tone as demanding as ever, eager to secure what she believed was her rightful inheritance. However, her careless management of the estate affairs revealed a shocking truth. Despite my brother's considerable earnings, his assets were nearly depleted. In her pursuit of the mansion and other properties, Laura had overlooked the fact that Kyle had accumulated significant debts. This oversight left her with only a fraction of what she had anticipated. Her pleas for help were met with no sympathy, as her earlier behavior had alienated those who might have otherwise been inclined to assist her. I made it clear to Laura that with Kyle's passing, the family ties that loosely bound us had effectively dissolved. Her behavior throughout had spoken louder than any words could, revealing her true motives despite her claims of affection for my brother. "I could potentially help you out of this trouble," I told her. "But how can you expect that after you've been so blatantly selfish?" My voice was tinged with disbelief and disappointment as I spoke. Laura's response was fraught with impatience, a stark contrast to the composed facade she usually maintained. She was grappling with the new and harsh reality of inheriting not only the mansion, but also the substantial debts that came with it. I reminded her, somewhat coldly, that inheriting meant taking responsibility for both assets and liabilities. I even pointed out that she had the option to renounce the inheritance within 5 months of being informed. The suggestion that she might sell the luxury items she had amassed over the years to cover the debts only elicited a flood of tears and desperate pleas for forgiveness. Despite her remorse, or perhaps because of the insincerity I felt underlined it, I found myself unable to offer any consolation. The conversation ended with a heavy heart on my part, as I was unable to reconcile her past actions with the cherished memory of my brother. Following Kyle's death, the plans for my wedding had to be postponed by a year. During this challenging period, a cloud of depression lingered over me, a stark reminder of the loss and betrayal I had experienced. Recognizing my distress, my husband and his family extended their heartfelt understanding and support. Their compassion was a beacon of light during a time darkened by loss and disappointment. Determined not to let the memory of my late brother down, I vowed to live a life of gratitude, channeling my energies into supporting and acknowledging those who had stood by me through thick and thin. When the wedding finally took place, it was not just a celebration of union, but also a tribute to Kyle's lasting impact on those around him. His popularity and the respect he commanded among his colleagues became poignantly evident as many of them visited his grave to pay their respects. They shared stories of his generosity and kindness, especially towards his co-workers, further cementing his legacy as a man who had genuinely cared for others beyond the confines of family and personal gain. Through these reflections and tributes, the wedding became a dual ceremony of love and remembrance, intertwining my new beginning with the honoring of a life that, while tragically cut short, had profoundly touched many. This convergence of joy and sorrow underscored the complexities of life and the enduring influence of genuine connections forged in both joyous and challenging times. I was always concerned that my brother's generosity might make him vulnerable to those looking to exploit his kind nature. However, the overwhelming support from friends and colleagues after his passing reassured me that his goodwill had been genuinely appreciated not taken advantage of. Meanwhile, news about Laura's decline began to circulate within the jewelry industry and among our social circles. Known for her lavish lifestyle and a series of questionable relationships, she painted a stark contrast to my brother's legacy of generosity and integrity. Laura, who had once lived in luxury, was now forced to sell her opulent mansion due to her unsustainable spending habits and the mountain of debt she had accumulated over the years. Now she found herself living in modest accommodations, a far cry from the grandeur she was accustomed to. Her financial downfall was a topic of quiet discussion and served as a cautionary tale about the perils of living beyond one's means. Reflecting on Laura's misfortunes, I couldn't help but feel vindicated in my long-held belief that marrying for money was a fundamentally flawed motivation. It was clear that Laura's priorities had led her to a lonely and challenging path, whereas my brother's focus on kindness and giving had earned him lasting respect and love from those around him. Motivated by these reflections, I vowed more fervently to honor my brother's memory by protecting his legacy. He had spent his life not only as a skilled surgeon, but as a pillar of support and generosity in our community. In his professional life, he was revered not just for his medical expertise, but for his willingness to go beyond the call of duty to assist his colleagues and patients alike. At home, he had always been my protector, guiding and supporting me through life's challenges. Determined to keep his spirit alive, I engaged more actively in community service and charity work, areas my brother was passionate about. I organized fundraisers and volunteered at the hospital where he had worked, helping to fund the programs he had started or supported. These efforts brought me a sense of closeness to him, a feeling that I was continuing his work in some way. Moreover, I took steps to ensure that the stories of his kindness and generosity were remembered and celebrated. I shared these stories at community gatherings and on social media, ensuring that his legacy would inspire others as much as it inspired me. The positive responses from people who had been touched by my brother's life encouraged me to keep sharing and celebrating his life. In doing so, I found a profound sense of purpose. While Laura's life seemed to spiral into chaos as a result of her choices, I found strength and fulfillment in upholding the values my brother had taught me. This contrast between our paths was a stark reminder of the different outcomes that result from our life choices. By choosing to embody my brother's principles of generosity and support, I not only honored his memory, but also enriched my own life, making it fuller and more meaningful. Through these actions, I not only kept my brother's memory alive, but also ensured that his legacy of kindness and selflessness continued to impact the community, proving that the values he lived by were his true lasting wealth. Hello there, I'm Rebecca. I'm 28 years old, fresh off the boat of a wedding to Richard, a man 7 years my senior. But let's rewind a bit, shall we? Let me paint a picture of the day Richard and I first met. It was at one of those fancy garden parties our parents loved to throw. I was 18, fresh out of high school, and Richard was 25, the new hotshot in his father's company. I remember him walking up to me, a glass of champagne in one hand. "Rebecca, right?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "I've heard a lot about you." I remember blushing, not knowing what to say. "And you're Richard?" "I've heard a lot about you too," I replied. He laughed, a sound that made my heart flutter. Hopefully all good things. We spent the rest of the evening talking, laughing, and to my surprise, connecting on a level I hadn't expected. It was that night that our parents, seeing us together, got the idea of us getting married. It took a few more years, but eventually their plan came to fruition. Before we got married, we signed this prenup. It was a pretty simple deal. If one of us cheated, the other got to call it quits and walk away with a cool $3 million. I had no plans of playing away, so I put pen to paper without batting an eyelid. I remembered. I recall the day we signed that agreement vividly. My dad, a man of few words but a heart as big as an ocean, looked at me with concern in his eyes. "Are you sure you're okay with this, Rebecca?" he asked, his voice steady but with underlying worry. "Dad, it's fine," I reassured him, giving him a quick hug. "I trust Richard and he trusts me. This is just a formality." Richard was there too. It was he who insisted on signing this paper. "I don't want you to feel like you're being cornered, Rebecca," he said, his voice sounding a little strained. "If you're not comfortable with this, we can discuss it more." But I just shook my head and smiled at him. "Richard, I'm fine with it. I trust you." He seemed relieved and gave me a warm smile back. "And I trust you, Rebecca." That was the start of our journey. We got married in a grand ceremony that was the talk of the town. I was excited about this new chapter in my life, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. After the wedding, we moved into a beautiful house on the outskirts of the city. It was a dream come true, living with Richard, waking up next to him every morning. He was sweet, caring, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Our honeymoon was like something out of a fairy tale. We spent 2 weeks in a beautiful beach resort, soaking up the sun and enjoying each other's company. But when we came back home, things started to change. Richard was suddenly a different person. He was distant, always lost in his thoughts. He would come home late from work and go straight to bed without even saying good night. We started sleeping in separate rooms, eating at different times, and barely spoke to each other. One day, I decided to confront him. "Richard," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what's going on? You've been acting strange ever since we got back from our honeymoon." He looked at me, his eyes devoid of the warmth they once had. "I've just been busy with work, Rebecca," he replied, not meeting my gaze. "But we barely talk anymore," I pressed on. "We're living like strangers in our own home." He sighed, running his fingers through his hair. "I know, Rebecca. I'm sorry, I'll try to make more time for us." But things didn't change. If anything, they got worse. Richard started coming home even later, sometimes not until the early hours of the morning. He stopped eating with me, and we barely saw each other. I started having suspicions. Was he seeing someone else? The thought made my stomach churn, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I decided to confront him again. "Richard," I said one night when he came home late, "are you seeing someone else?" He looked shocked at my question. "What? No, Rebecca. I would never do that to you." "But you're always out. You never spend time with me," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "I told you, it's just work," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not cheating on you, Rebecca." But I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. Richard was not the man I had married. He was distant, cold, and seemed to be hiding something. I didn't know what to do. I loved Richard, but I couldn't live like this. I decided to do some digging. If Richard wasn't going to tell me what was going on, I would find out for myself. I started by checking his phone when he was in the shower. I felt guilty about invading his privacy, but I was desperate for answers. I didn't find any suspicious messages or calls, but I did find something that made my heart drop. Richard had been searching for apartments. Was he planning on leaving me? I confronted him about it. "Richard, why are you looking for apartments? Are you planning on leaving me?" He looked taken aback. "No, Rebecca. I was just looking. I wasn't planning on leaving you." "But why were you looking?" I asked, my voice trembling. I don't know, Rebecca," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I need some space." One day, I decided to talk to my mom about it. She's always been my rock, my go-to person when things get tough. "Mom," I said, "I don't know what to do. Richard's changed. He's not the same person anymore." My mom listened, her face full of concern. "Rebecca," she said, "you're both still adjusting. You're newlyweds. It takes time to build a life together." I wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that this was just a phase, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. Richard was hiding something. I could feel it. I tried to shake off the feeling, tried to convince myself that Mom was right, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like a nagging voice in the back of my mind, constantly reminding me that something was off. A few weeks later, I gathered my courage and approached Richard. "I need a job," I said, looking him in the eye. He looked surprised. "You want to work?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. "Yes, I need to do something, Richard. I can't just sit at home all day." He thought for a moment, then said, "I can offer you a job at my foundation. We help kids in tough situations. Would you be interested?" I was taken aback. Richard's foundation was well known for its work with children. I had always admired the work they did. "Yes," I said without a moment's hesitation. "I'd love to." Working at the foundation was a breath of fresh air. I was busy. I was doing something meaningful. I met kids who were strong, resilient. Kids who had seen more hardships than any child should. It was heartbreaking, but it was also inspiring. The job kept me busy, kept my mind off the problems at home. Richard and I had our issues, but at least during the day, I had something else to focus on. The work was tough, emotionally draining, but it was worth it. I felt like I was making a difference, like I was doing something important. And for the first time in a long time, I felt happy. But even then, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Richard was acting strange, distant. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something was wrong, and I was determined to find out what it was. Left with a whirlwind of questions and a heart heavy with betrayal, I decided to hire a private detective. I needed to know if Richard was cheating on me. It wasn't just about my pride, it was about my peace of mind. I couldn't live in the shadow of doubt, constantly wondering what went wrong. And then there was the prenup, the one we signed before we got married. If Richard was cheating on me, it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a costly mistake. I found a detective agency in the city run by a man named Joe. He was an ex-cop, a grizzled veteran with a keen eye and a no-nonsense attitude. I told him my story, my suspicions, and he listened, his face impassive. "I'll do my best, Rebecca," he said when I finished. "But I can't promise anything. If your husband is cheating, he's doing a good job of hiding it." I nodded, understanding. "I just need to know, Joe. One way or another, I need to know." I remember the day he came to give me his report. His face was serious, his eyes sympathetic. "I'm sorry, Rebecca," he said. "I couldn't find any evidence that your husband is cheating on you." I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Part of me was glad that Richard wasn't cheating, but another part of me was frustrated. If he wasn't cheating, then why did he leave? What was he hiding? "Are you sure, Joe?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "There's nothing at all." Joe shook his head. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." I thanked Joe and paid him for his services. As I watched him leave, I felt a profound sense of loss. I was back where I started, with more questions than answers. I was working at a charity fund when he walked in. His name was Daniel, the new guy. He was handsome, with a charming smile that could light up a room. He was smart, with a quick wit and a sharp mind. He was funny, with a sense of humor that could make anyone laugh. And he looked like a famous actor, with his chiseled features and striking good looks. In short, he was my ideal man. But as much as I was drawn to Daniel, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. His arrival seemed too perfect, too convenient. I couldn't help but think about Richard and the prenup. If I was caught cheating, I would have to pay a hefty sum of $3 million. Could Daniel be a trap set by Richard to catch me in the act? I decided to hire Joe again, the private detective I had used to investigate Richard. I asked him to look into Daniel to see if he had any connections to Richard. Joe agreed to take the case. He started investigating Daniel, digging into his past, his connections. He followed him, watched his movements, his interactions. He was as thorough as ever, leaving no stone unturned. In the meantime, I tried to keep my distance from Daniel. It was difficult, especially when he was so charming, so attractive. But I had to be careful. I couldn't afford to fall into a trap, not when there was so much at stake. One day, Daniel asked me out for coffee. I was torn. Part of me wanted to say yes, to get to know him better. But another part of me was scared, worried about what Joe might find. "I'd love to, Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I'm really busy right now. Maybe some other time." Daniel seemed disappointed, but he didn't push. "Sure, Rebecca," he said, his smile dimming slightly. "Some other time." I felt a pang of guilt. What if I was wrong? What if Daniel was just a nice guy, and I was letting my suspicions ruin a potentially good thing? But I couldn't take the risk, not until I knew for sure. A few days later, Joe came to give me his report. His face was serious, his eyes hard. "I'm sorry, Rebecca," he said, "but your suspicions were right. Daniel is working for your husband." Husband? I felt a rush of emotions. Anger at Richard for trying to trap me. Relief that I hadn't fallen for it. Sadness that Daniel wasn't who I thought he was. But above all, I felt a sense of vindication. I wasn't crazy. My suspicions were valid. "Thank you, Joe," I said, my voice choked. "You've done a great job." As I watched Joe leave, I felt a strange sense of closure. I had dodged a bullet, avoided a costly mistake. But I had also lost something. The image of the ideal man, the hope of finding love again. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I wasn't going to let this get me down. I was stronger than that. I was going to move on, to find happiness again. I didn't need an ideal man. I just needed someone who was real, who was honest. And I was going to find that person, no matter what. I could have sent Daniel packing right then and there, but I decided to take a different route. I chose to play along, to befriend him. All the while, I made sure to keep my behavior above board, not giving Richard any reason to point fingers at me. Daniel, however, took my friendliness as a sign of something more. He started to loosen up, thinking he had me charmed. The irony was he was the one getting played, but I didn't let Daniel in on the secret. I couldn't risk him running back to Richard, so I kept up the act, maintained the friendly facade. One day, I decided to up the ante. I asked Daniel to join me for lunch, making it sound like a casual discussion about charity work. He agreed, a smug smile plastered on his face. He thought he was making progress. We found a quiet spot in the cafe. "So, Daniel," I began, "how are you finding the charity work?" He shrugged, a confident look in his eyes. "It's good, different but good." "And Richard?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you think of him?" Daniel looked surprised. "Richard? He's okay, I guess." "Why?" I shrugged, attempting to look casual. "Just curious. He's a bit of an enigma, isn't he?" Daniel laughed, clearly relieved. "Yeah, he can be a hard one to read." We continued to chat about work, about life. I made sure to keep my tone neutral, not to give him any reason to be suspicious. In the days that followed, I continued to play along, keeping up the friendly act, making sure to never cross the line. I was always on my guard, always careful. It was a risky game, but one I was willing to play for now. During one of our lunch meetings, Daniel looked at me, a serious look on his face. "You know, I've been thinking," he said. I raised an eyebrow, a chill running down my spine. "About?" He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "About us, about this thing we have." I felt my heart skip a beat. This was it, the moment I had been dreading. I forced a smile on my face. "And what is it that we have, Daniel?" He looked at me, a hopeful look in his eyes. "I think we have something special." I felt a pang of guilt. Daniel was falling into my trap just as I had planned, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. But I had to keep up the act, had to keep playing the game. So I smiled at Daniel, a fake smile plastered on my face. "Yes, Daniel," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We do have something special." And just like that, I had set the trap. The game was on. But at what cost? The Cold War at home with Richard was as icy as ever. We'd occasionally run into each other, exchange chilly greetings, and then retreat to our separate corners. Most nights, he'd be at his apartment, claiming it was more convenient for his work commute. One Sunday afternoon, I dialed Daniel's number, lacing my voice with a warmth that was as fake as his documents, inviting him over to my place. He probably thought I was finally ready to give in to his advances. Poor guy, he couldn't have been more wrong. As Daniel stepped into my home, he was greeted not by a seductive housewife, but by my old classmate, now a stern-faced police officer. He'd agreed to help me out, and the surprise on Daniel's face was worth every bit of it. The officer checked Daniel's papers, and as expected, they were as fake as a $3 bill. Now it was time for my move. I offered Daniel a choice. He could either stick with Richard and face the consequences of his fake documents, or he could switch sides and work for me. Daniel's eyes darted between me and the officer, and after a moment of silence, he nodded. He agreed to my deal. Checkmate, Richard. With that, the real game began. I had Richard's pawn now playing for my side, but I knew this was just the beginning. Richard was a crafty man. He wouldn't go down without a fight. In the days that followed, I kept a close watch on Daniel. Despite his agreement, I knew I couldn't fully trust him. He was a wild card, a potential threat, but for the time being, he was a useful one. One day, I summoned Daniel to my office. "We need to talk," I said, my tone serious. He looked at me, a hint of unease in his eyes. "About what?" "About Richard." I replied, "I need to know everything. His plans, his strategies, everything." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, I'll tell you everything I know." And just like that, I had my insider. My counterattack was ready, but this was just the beginning. The real battle was still ahead of us. Richard wouldn't go down without a fight, and I had to be prepared. I had to be ready because this wasn't just a game anymore. It was war. And in war, there are no rules, only survival. Days turned into weeks, and I was getting antsy. I wanted to confront Richard, to show him I wasn't the pushover he thought I was. Joe, whom I turned to once again, had given me some advice. "Push Richard," he suggested. "Make him think you've fallen into his trap." It was a gamble, but I was ready to play the game. So Daniel and I staged a photo shoot. We posed in ways that could be seen as compromising, as proof of an affair. But we were careful. We kept the originals where everything was as innocent as a Sunday school picnic. Once the photos were ready, I gave them to Daniel. "Give these to Richard. I said, handing over the envelope. Let him draw his own conclusions. Daniel had looked at me, concern etched on his face. You sure about this? He'd asked again. Once you start this, there's no going back. I know, I'd replied, a steely resolve in my voice. And I'm ready. The very next day, Richard was all smiles at dinner. He thought he caught me, that he'd got one over me. But he didn't say a word about it. But I wasn't worried. I knew what was coming. I was ready. Meanwhile, Joe was on the case. He was digging up dirt on Richard, finding all the evidence we needed. And finally, Joe called. Richard relaxed and lost his caution, he said, his voice rough with satisfaction. I've got him. I've got all the proof of Richard's cheating. Photos, videos, the whole shebang. I felt a rush of excitement. Good, I said, a smile spreading across my face. Let's bring him down. But I didn't confront Richard, not yet. I wanted him to think he was winning. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he'd been played. So I waited. I played the part of the dutiful wife, waiting for Richard to make his move. I knew what was coming, and I was ready. The clock was ticking. Towards the family dinner, I knew this was it, the showdown. I felt a strange calmness. I was ready. The dinner was at Richard's parents' mansion, a sprawling estate that reeked of old money. Richard was there, of course, playing the doting son and husband. But I knew the truth, and soon everyone else would too. We were halfway through the main course when Richard cleared his throat. He stood up, a smug smile playing on his lips. I have something to say, he announced, his eyes on me. He pulled out a set of photos of me with Daniel. He tossed them on the table like he was playing a winning hand. Proof, he said, his voice filled with triumph, of my wife's infidelity. The room went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. I was ready for this. I calmly stood up, meeting Richard's gaze. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I know this man, but he's not my lover. He's an actor hired by you, Richard, to frame me. I pulled out my phone and hit play. The room filled with Daniel's voice, confessing everything. Richard's smile faltered, his eyes widened in shock. But I wasn't done. I pulled out my own set of photos and videos, evidence of Richard's own affairs. I tossed them on the table. What about these, Richard? I asked, my voice cold. Can you explain them? Richard stammered, tried to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. His parents' faces turned to stone. You ungrateful brat. My father roared at Richard. We trusted you with our daughter, and this is how you repay us. Richard's mother was in tears. How could you, Richard? She sobbed. How could you do this to us, to her? The aftermath was swift. We divorced. Richard's parents, furious at their son's deceit, fired him from their company. His reputation was in tatters. And me. I walked away with $3 million in compensation. Now Richard is jobless, scrambling to pick up the pieces of his life. And me. I'm free. I'm enjoying the peace, the silence. I'm enjoying my life without Richard. I won. I took on Richard and won. I outsmarted him, played his own game better than he did. And it feels good. It feels right. From this point on, my brother and his wife have decided that they'll run the household by themselves, asking me to find a different place to live. My mother, siding with them, treated my presence as a nuisance. Do they even realize who's been paying for most of our home expenses? Such disregard was something I never saw coming. My name is Melissa, and I'm a 31-year-old woman who has lived at my parents' place since returning from college. Initially, I dove into the corporate world, aiming to carve out my career path. However, the hurdles proved too daunting. and I returned home facing a period of joblessness. During this time, I explored remote work opportunities, leveraging my background in science. I started a freelance engineering career, taking on small projects at first. The pay was modest, but the freedom to work independently held profound significance for me, offering a stark contrast to the structured environment of traditional jobs. This setup allowed me to earn a substantial income with minimal social interaction. As my confidence and client base grew, so did my income, eventually matching what I would make in a typical corporate job. Nevertheless, the main challenge was my parents' understanding of my work setup, particularly my mother's hesitance. My father seemed to get it after I explained, but my mother, who clings to traditional views, couldn't grasp the concept of working from home. Despite my efforts to clarify, showing her client emails, and pay statements as proof of my legitimate work, she remained dubious. She would often question the sustainability of my career and hint at its possible illegitimacy, suspecting it might be some underhanded business or even connected to some questionable group, despite the regular payments proving otherwise. Despite my detailed explanations, my mother's doubts persisted. She frequently voiced concerns over my dependency on what she saw as unstable unemployment benefits. While I had thought about moving out and living independently, my savings weren't quite ready to handle such a transition. During this period, my father's health began to decline, with worsening conditions in his legs and back requiring nursing care and leading to his early retirement. He assured me his pension would be enough, but knowing my mother's spending habits, I knew challenges lay ahead. As I watched my father's face, the lines of worry and fatigue were evident, mirroring his anxiety about our uncertain future. Throughout my college years and my subsequent return home due to mental health challenges, he had been my unwavering support. The thought of leaving him to fend for himself while I pursued an independent life weighed heavily on my heart. My mother, too, was visibly shaken by the abrupt decline in his health, struggling to grasp the sudden change. In light of these circumstances, I felt a profound sense of duty to give back to the family that had supported me through thick and thin. I reassured my father of my commitment to support the family financially from then on. He was initially surprised, questioning the sufficiency of my income. However, I confidently demonstrated the stability of my financial situation, which seemed to alleviate his concerns. My father, who had always tried to understand my unique work situation, was pleasantly surprised by my newfound financial stability. Encouraged by his acceptance, I took on the responsibility of contributing to household expenses, medical bills, and other financial obligations. Each month, I began transferring a significant portion of my income into my father's bank account. Aware of my mother's frequent use of my father's credit card, I took proactive steps by creating a new main card for myself and providing her with a supplementary card to help manage spending more efficiently. My father, always cautious about finances, urged my mother to adopt a more frugal approach. Despite my contributions, my mother remained skeptical and even questioned whether it was still appropriate for me to live at home. I defended my position by highlighting the financial support I was providing, arguing that my absence would make things more challenging for everyone. Although she was initially unconvinced and suspicious of my motives, my father's steady persuasion eventually swayed her to allow me to stay. As I continued balancing my work and household responsibilities, I noticed my mother increasingly taking my efforts for granted. Her expectations for the household chores grew stricter, often chiding me to complete tasks faster. "Can't you finish your chores quicker?" she would complain. I tried to explain the challenges of multitasking while maintaining a full workload, but she dismissed my concerns. The strain in our relationship grew, becoming seemingly irreparable in stark contrast to my father's understanding and appreciation of my efforts. Despite this strained dynamic, we persevered in this manner for a year. However, after that year, my father's health deteriorated further, necessitating his hospitalization. I visited him daily, maintaining our bond and support through this tough time. In those moments of shared concern and reassurance, my father expressed his gratitude, fully recognizing the tension between my mother and me as he faced his health challenges. Despite the emotional toll it sometimes took on me, I stayed committed to supporting my family, drawing strength from memories of my mother's dedication during my student years. However, the dynamic within our household took a sharp turn with the unexpected arrival of my brother Matthew and his wife Catherine. They announced they would be living with us to supposedly lighten my load. This news caught me off guard, and I noticed my mother avoiding my gaze during the discussion. Although Matthew and Catherine claimed they were here to help, their words seemed to carry an unspoken implication that I wasn't doing enough, my mother sadly hinting at my need to contribute more. Despite my surprise, I learned that Matthew, a graduate of a prestigious college, had secured a position at a well-respected company. This revelation made me question the real reasons behind their sudden move into our home. Surely, with Matthew's substantial salary, they could manage without relying on my financial support, especially since I was already fully engaged in my career pursuits. Adapting to life with Matthew and Catherine at home proved more challenging than expected. One morning, as I was deep in my work, Catherine's voice pierced through. "Wake up, Melissa. Make breakfast." She banged on my door, demanding attention. As a morning person already up and focused on my tasks, I explained that I was already working. Despite this, they insisted I prepare breakfast, pressing me to hurry along with it. The added demands of accommodating my brother and his wife added another layer of complexity to our already tense household dynamics. Catherine demanded I get breakfast ready, her tone leaving little room for protest. Reluctantly, I dragged myself to the kitchen. Our family usually enjoyed a leisurely pace in the morning, savoring meals when everyone, including my mother and Catherine, was around. I had always thought it was common for a wife to prepare breakfast for her husband, but Catherine insisted on a collaborative effort, and so I joined them. Despite my best efforts, their dissatisfaction was immediately apparent. "Is this what you prepared for breakfast?" "This isn't enough," they critiqued. I had meticulously arranged a breakfast plate with soft scrambled eggs, a crisp lettuce salad, freshly buttered toast, and a succulent sausage, thinking it would be appreciated. Yet it seemed I had somehow missed the mark. "You don't have to eat it," I retorted, surprised by their blunt criticism. Their shock was palpable, and quickly their surprise turned to confrontation. They questioned my attitude and demanded to know who I thought I was. My brother, often condescending and perhaps influenced by our mother, mocked me despite my attempts to explain my work commitments. They dismissed them outright. "What kind of work is that? Are you crazy?" they exclaimed, frustrated by their lack of understanding. The disruption to my work annoyed me. I grabbed my laptop, ignored their further protests, and left the house. As I walked away, my brother's voice followed me, demanding to know where I was going. I ignored his question and made my way to the hospital where my father was staying. Rushing into my father's hospital room, I found him looking up with a surprised expression. "Melissa, what's wrong? You seem flustered," he observed. I recounted the morning's events. My father, wearing a look of concern, responded, "I didn't know they were acting like that." "I'm sorry, Melissa. Don't worry about it. You can choose your way of life." Feeling somewhat lost and worried about my mother's comfort, with Matthew at home, I shared my concerns. The conversation with my father provided a much-needed perspective, reminding me of the importance of standing up for my own choices in life. My father offered me comforting reassurance, saying, "You don't need to be in a place where you don't feel comfortable. All I want is for you to live happily in the way you choose." Bolstered by his supportive words, I decided to leave home that evening. As I returned, I walked into a scene that felt straight out of a tense movie. The serious expressions on the faces of my mother, brother, and sister-in-law were unmistakable. My brother immediately accused me of shirking work responsibilities, claiming he had to take the day off because of my absence, a decision I internally questioned for its ease. Their voices grew louder, culminating in my brother's stern command. "Get out of here. From now on, the three of us will live together. If you don't want to stay, please leave. We don't need an overbearing presence like you to support us." His words were a blow, and to my surprise, I could only muster a confused, "Why?" Ignoring my protest, my brother and his wife were adamant about my departure, declaring that I was no longer needed. With our father absent, my mother aligned with their sentiments and saw me as an obstruction. My frustration mounted as they downplayed my role in managing the family's finances, focusing solely on their concerns. Enraged by their insensitivity and unwillingness to let the situation deteriorate further under their control, I devised a plan. I discreetly transferred the funds from the credit card my mother used daily to another account I managed. This move was designed to catch her off guard when she found she could no longer use her card. I also initiated a transfer of money from my father's account, a critical support for the family's financial stability, to reinforce my position and ensure they understood the impact of my contributions. I made sure that only my father's medical expenses could be withdrawn from the separate account I had set up, a detail that my mother was not aware of. This meant a significant financial burden would now shift to my brother and his wife. While I wasn't fully aware of the specifics of my brother's income, I was confident that he would now truly feel the financial strain. After completing all the necessary arrangements, I packed my belongings and announced my intention to leave. "I'm leaving this place." To my surprise, my mother, brother, and sister-in-law, who had previously been relentless in their harassment, were visibly shocked by my decision. Their expressions of astonishment showed they hadn't anticipated such a decisive move from me. Yet, despite their shock, there was a subtle hint of enjoyment in their reactions. As I declared my departure, they made belittling remarks and expressed their relief with biting comments like, "You're finally leaving. We've never dealt with such a troublesome person. You're not coming back, are you?" In response, I firmly stated, "Of course not. Don't contact me." They smiled as I walked out, but I couldn't help wondering how they would cope once the reality of my absence and the financial implications settled in. Embarking on a new life in a tranquil environment, I found solace and the freedom to enjoy my own space. Refreshed and focused, I immersed myself in my work. However, as I had anticipated, the peace was soon disrupted by an unexpected call from my brother. "I told you not to contact me." "What's wrong?" I asked, my tone reflecting my annoyance. His voice carried a mix of surprise and urgency as he inquired about my involvement in the family's financial transactions. Confirming my role, I reminded him that I had explained my work responsibilities multiple times, but neither he nor our mother had taken them seriously. Expressing his confusion, he admitted, "Well, Mom said a lot of things, and I was a little confused." It was an acknowledgement that perhaps they had misjudged the situation, and the fault wasn't mine after all. He explained that they were in a financial bind. With my absence, they found it challenging to manage expenses, and my mother's unchecked spending had only made things worse. Although I felt a twinge of sympathy, I firmly stated, "I was able to support you in many ways because I was living there. Now that I'm not, you'll have to manage on your own." The situation took an unexpected turn when my brother urgently contacted me again. asking for help to transfer money into his bank account. Baffled, I half-jokingly asked if he was serious, especially since he had been working at a sizable company. To my surprise, he admitted he had been fired due to a significant error at work. This revelation left me momentarily speechless. It seemed he might have moved back to our parents' home under the assumption that there was plenty of money to go around, possibly relying on the idea of a stable pension after our father's retirement. Wanting to clarify the extent of my financial contributions to the household, I found a certain irony in imagining his shock upon discovering the reality. His wife and my mother also joined in, pleading for financial help, claiming that they were nearly out of savings. My mother even disclosed that my father had decided to stop contributing to the household finances. In response, I declared that I had supported them sufficiently and urged them to work hard and support themselves. I chose to cut off communication, emphasizing my decision to distance myself from their financial difficulties. Meanwhile, my father, aware of the tension in his relationship with my mother, consulted a lawyer and decided to pursue a quieter life elsewhere. I continued to visit my father daily, maintaining our close relationship. During one of these visits, a friend informed me about my brother's ongoing struggles, further highlighting the consequences of their lack of financial prudence. He had settled into a modest apartment, adopting a frugal lifestyle. Meanwhile, my mother, who had always been a homemaker, struggled to adapt to her new job. My brother found it challenging to mesh with the opinions of his younger colleagues. Despite his wife's efforts to support him, she eventually found the pressure overwhelming and chose to leave, forcing my brother and mother to face their challenges on their own. Concerns lingered about my mother, who continued her old habits of overspending, leading to mounting debts. However, I recognized that there were limits to the assistance I could provide without compromising my stability. Focused on my endeavors, I worked diligently from my comfortable living space, gradually accumulating more resources and contemplating new ventures. I aimed to spend quality time with my father, who remained a source of cheer in my life. Each moment spent with him was cherished, appreciating the peace and happiness he now found away from the familial tensions.